Good afternoon. So welcome to my sci-fi channel, so to speak. In this video, I'm going to go over three stories that deal with what would happen if the children were left on Earth and only the children survived and all of the adults were killed either because of a plague or because of some radiation sickness. How would the children lead the world? What kind of world would the children leave behind? And so I started this video series when I told my students that research is a lot of fun. And when you do research, the first thing you have to do is you have to come up with a good research question. And then the answer to that research question becomes your thesis statement. And the fun of research is researching and finding the answers to that research question. So the research question I came up with was, do countries around the world have different kinds of science fiction? Is there such a thing as science fiction around the world? And up until I started doing this research, I thought that the only science fiction there was either Star Trek or Isaac Asimov with I, Robot and Ray Bradbury. In other words, American authors. And so I was surprised to find out that there indeed is science fiction around the world. How American of me. And that each country has its own version of science fiction, and each science fiction story from other countries come layered with the cultures, the attitudes, and history, fears, and aspirations of that country. So I found it fascinating to read science fiction from other perspectives. Science fiction from a South American perspective, science fiction from a Russian perspective, science fiction from a Chinese perspective, science fiction from an African perspective. And so it has been a fun trip through research. And so I've been doing these videos based on the different kinds of science fiction stories I have been reading. And so what I did today was I put together three science fiction stories with a similar theme. One story is from Britain, another one is from America, and another one is from China. And all three stories are about what would happen if all the adults died and just left only the children behind. And so in all three stories, the adults meaning all the kids over 13, people over 13, all suddenly die. And then the children are left alone to fend for themselves. And so what kind of world with no adults at all available at all? How would the children, so in other words, the entire world is just filled with 7-year-olds, 8-year-olds, 9-year-olds, 10-year-olds, 11-year-olds, 12 being the oldest. So what kind of world would that be? How would the children survive or eat, find food, develop a government? Or would everything turn into chaos? So that's today's research question: is what would the world be like if all the adults, in other words, people over 13, suddenly died? And so the British had their Lord of the Flies. The Americans had their Miri from the original Star Trek series, and the Chinese have their Supernova Era by Liu Cixin. So I will share my screen and go over the different themes and symbols and attitudes of each of these stories based on what country they all come from. And I always find it fascinating to see the different perspectives and many different ways in which the different countries use this particular science fiction trope of if only the children were left behind and all the adults were gone. So here I will, here I will share my screen so that you could see the results of my research. So Lord of the Flies is a 1954 novel by William Golding. The novel tells the story of a group of British boys who are stranded on an uninhabited island after their plane crashes. Without adults to guide them, The boys quickly devolve into savagery, engaging in violence and warfare. The novel reflects the values of the United Kingdom in the 1950s, which was a time of great social and economic change. The novel suggests that without strong institutions to guide them, people will revert to savagery. Supernova Era is a 2000 novel by Liu Cixin. The novel tells the story of a group of children who are orphaned after a supernova kills most of the adults on Earth. The children are forced to fend for themselves, and they eventually create a new society. The novel reflects the values of China in the 2000s, which was a time of great economic growth. The novel suggests that even in the face of great adversity, people can still find hope and create a better future. The movie version for Supernova Era will be coming out in 2026, so stay tuned. Miri of Star Trek is a 1968 episode of the original Star Trek series. The episode tells the story of a planet which is inhabited by children who have been stranded on the planet for centuries. The children have no adults to guide them, and they have developed a society that is primitive and violent. And so these three stories all portray a world where adults are absent. In the British version, Lord of the Flies, British children are left left on a stranded island to fend for themselves after their boat sank and all of the adults died in the drowning. In the American Miri of Star Trek, a man-made plague kills all the adults. And in the Chinese story, Supernova Era by Liu Cixin, radiation sickness kills off all the adults and leaves children under 13 to run the world. So how each group of children manage to survive in a world without adults depends on the culture of each group of children, which makes this for a fascinating psychological study. Lord of the Flies. Lord of the Flies is a novel written by William Golding. The story begins with a group of British boys ranging in age from around 6 to 12 who find themselves stranded on an uninhabited island after their plane crashes. With no adults surviving the crash, the boys are left to fend for themselves and establish their own society. At first, the British boys attempt to maintain order and establish a system of rules and responsibilities. They elect a leader, Ralph, and create a signal fire in the hopes of attracting rescuers. However, as time passes and the boys struggle to survive, the social structure begins to break down. A power struggle emerges between Ralph and Jack, who leads a group of boys focused on hunting and indulging in their primal instincts. Jack eventually forms his own tribe, and the island becomes divided between Ralph's group representing order and civilization and Jack's group representing savagery and anarchy. The boys' descent into savagery is accompanied by the emergence of a mythical figure known as the Beast, which symbolizes the darkness and innate evil within human nature. The boys' fear and belief in the Beast drive them further apart and into acts of violence. As tensions escalate, Simon, a thoughtful and kind-hearted boy who wears glasses, discovers that the Beast is in fact a dead parachutist tangled in the trees. When he attempts to share the truth with the others, he is mistaken for the Beast and brutally murdered by the frenzied boys. The novel concludes with a dramatic confrontation between Ralph and Jack as the island descends into chaos, violence, and the entire island erupts into flames. Eventually, a naval officer arrives on the island, rescuing the boys and bringing an end to their tragic and brutal experience. And I remember the part of the book when the naval officer arrived on the island. He was like, what's going on? This entire island is in flames, and there's a bunch of boys dressed in having no clothes and just like running around savage. And so Lord of the Flies explores themes of the inherent darkness in human nature, the fragility of civilization, and the tension between societal rules and individual desires. The story serves as an allegory for the potential savagery that can arise in the absence of societal constraints and the loss of innocence in the face of adversity. In this story, there is an analysis of power dynamics, social order, and the breakdown of civilization. However, as time goes on and the absence of adult authority becomes more pronounced, their cultural norms begin to change, and the island burns down as anarchy reigns in a world without adults. So in Lord of the Flies, the setting is on a remote, uninhabited island devoid of modern civilization. The absence of adults and social structures allow the boys to create their own microcosm. Theme: exploration of the inherent darkness and savagery within human nature. Character development: the characters undergo a transformation as they struggle for power and survival. Now, when the boys first arrive on the island, they're dressed in beautiful looking private school uniforms, and the British boys, represent the creme of British society. And so when you see the breakdown of civilization, it's an allegory to seeing the breakdown of British society itself. And so here the characters in Lord of the Flies undergo a rapid transformation as they struggle for power and survival. They represent different facets of human nature, from leadership and rationality to cruelty and fear. The boys initially elect a leader, Ralph, and establish rules and regulations for governance. However, as time passes, a power struggle arises between Ralph and Jack, leading to the fragmentation of the group and the formation of two rival factions. And so Ralph represented order, stability, civilization, and Jack represented anarchy, chaos, and violence. And those are the two sides of the human nature, that allegory, that are represented by Ralph and Jack. And in the end, in this novel, it's the anarchy, it's the beast that wins. And so here, the British children at first try to establish order. And at first, they try to collaborate and have teamwork. And they were resourceful at first in being adaptive to their environment. But with the absence of adults, that led to the breakdown of society. Children still retained some concepts of politeness, fairness, and respect. But all of that broke down at the very end, because what won over was that the boys divided themselves into two distinct groups. In other words, they developed a tribal mentality, with Jack's group embracing a more savage and primal way of life, and they create their own rituals, symbols, and social hierarchies, devolving into a tribal culture driven by fear, violence, and pursuit of power. So allegorical nature, the Lord of the Flies, is widely regarded as an allegorical novel. The characters and events symbolize human nature, in other words, the dark side of human nature, and the island represents the microcosm of society. A prominent theme in Lord of the Flies is the loss of innocence. As the boys find themselves stranded on the island, they initially attempt to maintain order and adhere to civilized norms. However, as they succumb to their primal instincts and the fear of the unknown, their innocence gives way to savagery and violence. The concept of the beast is central to the novel. It symbolizes the innate evil and darkness within society. Initially, the boys believe in a physical beast on the island, but as the story progresses, it becomes apparent that the true beasts reside within themselves, representing the capacity for humans for cruelty and destruction. But in reality, the beast was actually the decomposed body of the parachutist who tried to parachute out of the plane and got stuck in a tree. But because of fear and ignorance, the boys transform the truth into something else, and it's that fear that caused all that violence and also caused the murder of Piggy. That was the kid with the glasses. In Lord of the Flies, that kid, the kid with the glasses, was made fun of because he couldn't see, he was physically inept, he didn't have muscles, and that sort of thing. And so Lord of the Flies explores the dynamics of power and control. The struggle for leadership between Ralph and Jack serves as a microcosm of broader power struggles within society. Jack's charismatic and authoritarian leadership contrasts with Ralph's democratic approach, highlighting the tension between order and chaos. So this novel talks about the difference between civilization versus savagery. And so the boys' attempt to create a civilized society erodes as they descend into primitive behavior and indulge in their basest instincts. So Lord of the Flies explores the breakdown of social order and the emergence of anarchy as the boys become more disconnected from societal norms and the influence of adults. Their self-governing system collapses, leading to violence, fear, and the disintegration of the island community. So Golding employs rich symbolism throughout the novel. The conch shell represents authority and order. Piggy's glasses symbolize reason and intellect. The signal fire symbolizes hope and the boy's connection to the outside world. These symbols deepen the thematic explorations and add layers of meaning to the story. But Lord of the Flies has a dark and grim tone, exploring the descent into savagery and the loss of innocence among the boys. It offers a critical view of human nature and society. So for the British, there is no order unless children are exposed to the proper Christian values of European society. Without these proper Christian and British values, order, then chaos ensues. When the British boys are finally rescued from the island, the question remains, who will rescue the adults in the disorder of modern society? Since without the civilizing influence of the Christian religion, will humans revert back to beasts? So when the boys get rescued by the adults, then my English teacher said, but who will rescue the adults? Okay, so that's the British version of what would happen if a bunch of children were left on their own. The bunch of children would descend into savagery without the British order of civilization. Supernova Era by Liu Xijin. So here, the adults are dying. In 1 year, the children will be all that's left of humanity. So Supernova Era is a science fiction novel written by Liu Xijin, the renowned Chinese author of the Three-Body Problem trilogy. The story is set in the near future and begins with the sudden explosion of a nearby star, causing a wave of deadly radiation to engulf the Earth. The radiation has a unique effect. It kills all the adults on the planet, leaving only children under the age of 13 alive. So the older children, who are about 12 or 13, find themselves the new leaders of the world, and they must quickly adapt to their roles and face the challenges of rebuilding society. And so the novel focuses on a group of Chinese children who find themselves in positions of power and responsibility. So just like in Lord of the Flies, the children establish a new government, and they call themselves the Supernova Era Committee, and develop a system to harness the advanced technology left behind by the adult world. This technology allows them to accelerate their learning, creating a fast-paced and dynamic society. And so what happens is that before the adults all died out, they had left this huge computer, and this huge computer is connected to all the telephones, to all the in the country. And so if you stand in front of the computer, and let's say a whole bunch of people call you, then the entire computer screen will light up. If thousands of people call you at the same time, then thousands of lights will light up on the computer screen. And so what happened was, after all the adults died of radiation sickness and all the kids realized they're all alone, so the first thing the children of China did was they all called the leaders, the leaders in the Supernova Era committee, who were all in Beijing. And so they all called and said, "Hello, Beijing, what do I do? My parents are gone. Everybody's dead. What do I do next?" And so thousands of calls came in, and the whole switchboard lit up with thousands of crying little kids, all asking these three leaders who were also 11, 12, and they also didn't know what to do. So it was like the blind leading the blind, children leading other children, like what to do next. And so everything was in disarray. And so, however, the young leaders soon faced the harsh realities of governing. They must make difficult decisions regarding resource allocation, education, and maintaining order among the children. As time passes, conflict arises among different factions and groups, revealing the complex nature of human society, even among children. And so they all communicated across the switchboard, this huge switchboard. So the first thing the Chinese, the 3 12-year-olds or whatever in the Beijing computer room did was to tell the computer, "Okay, computer, call each and every kid in China," because the computer was connected to every telephone. "Call each kid up and tell them everything is going to be all right." And so right away the computer made a phone call to all the children in every household, and every kid would pick up the phone and then hear a calming computer voice that would say, "Everything's going to be okay, just follow the directions from Beijing." And so for a while that calmed everybody down. And so as the children continued to grow and adapt, they faced the looming threat of a return to adulthood when the radiation effect will wear off. So this creates a sense of urgency and drives their efforts to secure the future of society. In other words, what happened was the adults in the Chinese version, so the adults knew as soon as the supernova exploded, the adults started to realize that they were dying of radiation sickness. And then the adults estimated they all only had a few months to live, so that in those last few months that the adults were alive, they prepared for the children to take over. And so each adult would take their 5-year-old to the armory and teach them how to use the weapons, or they would take their 5-year-old to the government office and teach them how to run a huge computer, because after the adults were gone, they knew that the children would have to run the world. And it was so abrupt. And so here, Supernova Era explores themes of power, responsibility, and resilience of youth. It raises questions about the nature of governance, the impact of technology on society, and the potential consequences of sudden shifts in power dynamics. So what happened was, so here you have the radiation hit Earth, and all of the adults, just like in the Star Trek episode Miri, all the adults got sick. And so here, the adults, their immune system could not fight against the effects of the radiation. However, the children, the only reason why the children survived was because their immune system were immune to the effects of the radiation sickness, because in the children's body, the immune system could regenerate, but the adults' immune system could not regenerate from the radiation sickness. So as a result, all of the adults died off from the radiation sickness, leaving the children behind. And so Supernova Era explores a world where all adults suddenly die off due to a supernova event, leaving only children to rebuild society. Liu Shichun's novel has a mix of tones. It starts with a sense of awe and wonder as the supernova occurs, but transitions into a more somber tone as the children grapple with the challenges of rebuilding society. Supernova Era is set on Earth in the near future after a catastrophic event. The world undergoes a rapid technological advancement as the children strive to rebuild society. And so in Supernova Era, in the initial part of the novel, it focuses on how the supernova event affects the children of China. And then later in the novel explores how the supernova event affected the children all around the world. So when the adults die of radiation poisoning, leaving the children and babies behind, the leaders took refuge in a huge computer complex left behind by the adults. This computer complex is an intense computer database that connects to every phone in the country, and it is a huge AI machine that can communicate to all the children in the country at the same time. When the children finally realized the adults were not coming back, then all the children, Chinese children, cried, were confused, and all of them called Beijing for assistance. The phones were ringing off the hook. Every phone call had a crying kid asking the leaders of Beijing, who were children themselves, what to do next. Millions of calls came at the same time, all asking the same question. My mommy is gone. What do I do next? And so interestingly, the Chinese children instinctively reached out to a central authority in Beijing for help because Chinese children respect authority and obey authority. As a large group, all the children, through the computer database, made decisions together on how to run the country. In this Chinese scenario of Lord of the Flies, there was no individual struggle for power, no gangs, no crime. There was just the confusion of what to do in a world without adults. And then this confusion was diffused with the help of a friendly computer. So when the Chinese leaders, the Beijing kids, did not know what to do, they asked the computer what to do. They would say, well, all these children are calling us from all around China. What do we do? We're only 12 years old ourselves. Then the computer, which was left behind from the adults, told them what to do. And so the friendly computer was used to help the children make difficult decisions. And then after everything settled down and the computer helped rerun the whole country, then everybody settled down, and then the children then created a VR, virtual reality, world within the computer within which they would all meet. And so they would each kid created their own avatar, and then all 1 billion kids all would sit. You would see a nice, say, a picnic area where 1 billion kids sitting there with their avatars would then discuss with the leaders what they would do next. And so together, all 1 billion Chinese kids came up with a 5-year plan where they built their own VR world of China's future inside the computer together. Then as one, the computer would summarize all their requests as one to give to the Chinese kid leaders in Beijing. This approach to leadership characterizes the Chinese collectivism and group-based culture as opposed to the individualistic power struggle of Jack and Ralph when they tried to establish order on a stranded island in Lord of the Flies in a world without adults. So you're already beginning to see the cultural differences in which the Chinese children would obey the authority of a computer in order to reestablish order. And then the British kids did not have a friendly computer, so instead they descended into chaos, which leaves one to wonder if the Chinese children had not had that friendly computer, would they have descended also into chaos in a world without adults? So here is the theme of Supernova Era. So here it's the examination of the challenges and responsibilities faced by young individuals in rebuilding society, the exploration of the potential consequences of a sudden shift in power from adults to children, rapid maturation. With the absence of adults, Chinese children must grow up quickly and take on adult responsibilities. They undergo accelerated learning and training programs to acquire the knowledge and skills needed to run the society. So what happened was, when the adults realized they only had 10 months to live, in those 10 months, they tried to teach their 5-year-old or 6-year-old 20 years of engineering or 20 years of governance, and so that the 5-year-old, 6-year-old all had to suddenly grow up. And so that's rapid maturation. Technological advancement. The children in Supernova Era have access to advanced technology left behind by adults. So they quickly harness this technology and incorporate it into their cultural practices, relying on it for survival, communication, and decision-making. Leadership and governance of Chinese children. So Chinese children are more into obeying a central authority because of the group-based nature of Chinese culture. And so cultural values and norms. So the potential emphasis on collectivism and community cooperation due to cultural values, Chinese values of harmony and social cohesion. And then the strong influence of Confucian principles, which emphasize hierarchy, respect for authority, and the fulfillment of societal values. In a scenario with Chinese children, there might be a cultural inclination toward respecting and obeying authority figures. So they might establish a more hierarchical leadership structure with a clear chain of command. And so in this case, the Chinese children learn to obey the friendly voice of their computer. Decision-making. Decision-making would be influenced also by Confucian principles of filial piety, that is, respect for elders, where older children or those of higher social status would give the orders, and then the children of younger age and lower social status would automatically obey. Character development. The children in Supernova Era must rapidly mature and adapt to their new roles as leaders and decision makers. They face moral dilemmas and challenges in governing a society. Technological advancement. In Supernova Era, the advanced technology left behind by the adult civilization plays a significant role. The children quickly adapt and utilize this technology to their advantage. They establish a brain pad system that allows them to learn and absorb knowledge at an accelerated rate, surpassing the intellectual capacities of adults. This technological advancement becomes a crucial factor in their survival and the development of a new society. As a result of the radiation, the children of Supernova Era age at an accelerated pace. Each year of their lives is equivalent to a month of physical and mental development. This rapid maturation poses challenges as the young leaders must navigate the responsibilities and expectations associated with their roles. Societal challenges. The children in Supernova Era face numerous challenges as they strive to rebuild society. They must tackle issues of resource distribution, education, maintaining order, and establishing societal norms. So Liu Xichin delves into the intricate dynamics of power struggles, factionalism, and the ethical dilemmas faced by the young leaders in their quest to create a functional and just society. And just like Lord of the Rings, just like Lord of the Flies, Supernova Era delves into questions about human nature and the potential consequences of sudden shifts in power dynamics. The novel examines how the children, who were previously innocent and carefree, are forced to confront the darker aspects of human nature as they grapple with authority, rivalry, and the complexities of governance. But the central, unlike Lord of the Flies, where everybody descended, all the kids descended into anarchy and chaos, and civilization broke down. Instead, in Supernova Era, the children were able to adapt, be resilient, and they were able to overcome obstacles and rebuild society, but not without casualties. And so here, this is where Liu Cixin, so somewhere within the middle of the novel, the leaders of China and the leaders of America, the children, the child meet, and the American children leaders, the child leaders, decide that they want to have an Olympics where the different nations, they want to play games, and so therefore they would all get to know each other, play games, and have some fun. And so they all decide to hold the Olympics in Antarctica, and in these Olympics they would shoot at each other and decide who has the better weapons. And so then the children get caught up and get carried away in their competition as to who is the better nation. They bring all of their nuclear weapons, believe it or not, the kids were actually driving all the nuclear weapons to Antarctica, and they start trying to shoot each other with the nuclear weapons without a clear understanding of how dangerous those weapons really are. And so as a result, when the kids get carried away with the competition, they accidentally set off a bunch of nuclear weapons from the different countries, and all of the weapons converge onto Antarctica. Thousands upon thousands of kids are killed. And so even in Supernova Era, even though in the end they do reestablish society, but not at the cost of thousands of children and die, because everything descended into anarchy as they got carried away trying to figure out who is the stronger, better nation. In other words, who should have the power to take over, because at the time Antarctica was starting to melt and become really like spring-like due to climate change. And so each nation wanted to take a bigger slice of the land of Antarctica. And so they figured whoever won the game would then get to control Antarctica. And so when the two factions started to fight over Antarctica, and then the nuclear weapons were set off, causing a nuclear explosion on Antarctica, and that's when, as they say, the shit hit the fan. And so that's why, and it's at that juncture in Supernova Era that Liu Cixin mentions Lord of the Flies. He actually says, and William Golding, the author of Lord of the Flies, understood very well the heart of the children. In other words, Liu Cixin was saying that if you don't have social order, if it's all about power grabs, then you're going to descend into chaos. If all people care about is themselves and power, then you're just going to have a lot of chaos, and civilization will just disappear. And so the moral of the story is people have to work together. People have to share their power. And so therefore, in order for everybody to get along, everyone has to all give up their egos and power struggles, and then work together in order to rebuild all of Earth's society now that all the adults are gone. So that's the moral of the story, is everyone has to come together in order to rebuild society, which is at the end of the story is what happens in Supernova Era, is that everybody did come together in order to rebuild society. I won't tell you the rest of what happens, but it's an interesting ending. And so each of the different stories, so far I'm doing Lord of the Flies, in which everything descends into chaos, because everybody was, Jack and Ralph only cared about their power struggle and did not care about the welfare of the entire group. And so if in Supernova Era, if the children forget about the power struggle and just focus on the, what's good, what's for the good, the common good, the greater good, do everything for the greater good together, then you could rebuild society. And so each of the stories mentioned, so far, the British and the Chinese each reflect their society's attitudes and fears and aspirations. So the last story, Miri, which is from the original Star Trek series, same thing. The children are all that's left on the planet after the adults created some kind of virus in order to give themselves to live forever, right? But instead, the virus backfired and all of the adults rapidly aged and died. And only the children under 13 survived. And so the crew of the Enterprise lands on this planet and finds it bizarre that there are no adults. And then as the Enterprise does their research, and then only then do they realize, oh my goodness, we've just gotten the same virus. We the adults are dying of the same virus, aging virus that killed off the adults of the planet. So then the crew of the Enterprise have very little time in which they have to find a cure, because they have to quarantine themselves on the planet. They can't go back up to the ship, because then they would infect all the other crew members who would die off. And so Miri, on the original, that's the name of the next story, made in the United States, reflects American values of an optimistic view of what can happen if children are left by themselves, and that if the children and the adults work together, you can cure the sickness so that the adults don't have to all die off and that sort of thing. So working together. So that is similar to Supernova Era, where if everybody works together, they can solve the problem. The only difference is that while in Supernova Era, the adults were resigned to their fate. Okay, we've got radiation sickness. Okay, we're going to die off. So they did, but they did in a very orderly fashion. All the adults were all told to go to different places on Earth, and all the adults would assemble together out of view of the children, and they all died off together in mass graves. And it wasn't until several generations later that the children found those mass graves in Supernova Era. Now in Miri, I'll share my screen, and then I will go over how the Americans, so far we've seen how the British view of what would happen if children were left alone. They would descend into anarchy. And then the Chinese view, if children were left alone, yes, they too would rebuild society for a while, then descend into anarchy with thousands of them dying, but then by the end, they learn to come together in order to restore order. So that's very Chinese, in which you have exposition, a little bit of complication, and everything gets restored back to order. That's a very Chinese way of telling a story. Then coming into Miri, which reflects American ingenuity, American know-how, American resourcefulness, and the American adult refusal to die, a refusal to be resigned to their fate. And so that characterizes Miri. So each nation has their own way of dealing with the kids, so to speak. So now I'm going to then go over, and I remember watching Miri as a kid, and I was like, wow, imagine that. And I was a kid at the time, and I was thinking, wow, imagine if all the adults were gone, what would I do? And so here I will go over Supernova. Okay, and so the influence, so I'm going to go over, I'll come back to this in a second. So Miri from Star Trek. So Miri is a character from the original Star Trek series, featured in the episode aptly titled Miri. In this episode, the crew of the Starship Enterprise encounters a planet that appears to be a duplicate of Earth. So this is Miri. Miri is a young girl who resides on this planet, which has been devastated by a deadly disease that has killed all the adults and left only children behind. As the crew explores the planet, they discover that the disease that killed all the adults had halted the aging process for the children, leaving them in a state of perpetual adolescence. So Miri and her peers struggle to survive in a post-apocalyptic environment, facing challenges such as scarcity of resources and a breakdown of societal norms. The crew of the Enterprise, led by Captain Kirk, becomes aware of the children's plight and works to find a cure for the disease, while also offering them assistance. However, tensions arise as some of the children, including Miri, become distrustful of the adults due to the fear of being taken away from their home. Throughout the episode, Miri forms a connection with Captain Kirk, who demonstrates compassion and understanding towards the children. As the crew races against time to find a cure, Miri becomes a key figure in helping them navigate the challenges of the planet and uncover its mysteries. In the end, the crew of the Enterprise manages to find a cure for the disease, offering hope for the children and the possibility of a better future. Miri's story highlights themes of resilience, adaptability, and the importance of compassion in the face of adversity. In the Star Trek episode Miri, the cultural differences among the children who survive a deadly disease showcase their adaptation to a world without adults. Miri is a sympathetic character who forms a connection with Captain Kirk. She represents the hope for the future and the possibility of finding a solution to the disease. And so the theme in Miri is exploration of the impact of a deadly disease on society and the struggle for survival. Social structure. The children in Miri's world attempt to maintain a semblance of social order. They form their own community and adhere to rules and traditions they have developed. The Star Trek universe is characterized by advanced technology, interstellar travel, and a diverse range of alien species. The episode Miri takes place on a planet that mirrors Earth's past. So Miri is on an Earth-like planet that was once inhabited by humanoid species known as the Onlys. However, due to a failed experiment to prolong life, all adults on the planet died, leaving only the children behind. The surviving children, known as Onlys, formed their own society, gangs, and tribes. Without adult supervision, the children of Miri organized themselves into various gangs and tribes. Each gang had its own leader, and the social structure was based on dominance and control. The strongest leader would exert authority and maintain power over their respective groups. Now that's very similar to what happened to Jack and Ralph in Lord of the Flies. On Miri's planet, a disease called the Life Prolongation Project caused the children to stop aging at a certain point, resulting in their eternal youth. However, the disease also brought about mental and physical degradation, leading to insanity and eventual death. So once the children reached 13, they would die off just like the adults. Fear and isolation. The fear of the disease and its consequences made the children of Miri become suspicious of outsiders. They were isolated from the rest of the universe, with the planet under strict quarantine protocols to prevent the spread of the disease. When the crew of the Starship Enterprise visits the planet, their presence disrupted the social order. The Onlys saw them as a potential cure for the disease and fought among themselves to gain control over the newcomers. Through the events of this episode, the crew of the Enterprise managed to find a cure and save the Onlys from their impending doom. With the cure administered, the children of Miri would have the opportunity to grow up and form a new, more balanced society. And so, in this episode, just like in Lord of the Flies, the adults come and rescue the children from themselves. And then just like in Supernova Era, the children grow up and are able to lead a normal life. And in two of the stories, the adults save the children. And only in Supernova Era is when the children rescue themselves. So that's the difference. So Miri's character showcases a range of emotions throughout the episode. Initially, she is curious about the arrival of the Enterprise crew, but later she has a crush on Captain Kirk and helps bring together collaboration between the Enterprise and the other kids in order to find a cure. So that was her connection. She has a special connection, collaboration with the crew. And so Miri's character in the Star Trek, so as the episode progresses, Miri becomes actively involved in assisting the Enterprise crew. She helps them navigate the challenges of the planet, including avoiding dangerous traps and providing valuable information about her society. Through interactions with the crew, Miri learns about science and the importance of finding a cure for the deadly disease that has plagued her planet. She helps the crew in their efforts to find a cure, drawing on her knowledge and their peculiarities. So Miri undergoes personal growth throughout the episode, evolving from a fearful adolescent to a young adult. And so Miri's character explores themes of survival, trust, and the resilience of the human spirit. Her journey highlights the importance of connection, empathy, and collaboration in overcoming challenges and finding hope in dire circumstances. So the episode Miri has a hopeful and optimistic tone as the crew of the Enterprise offers assistance and finds a cure for the disease. The focus is on problem solving and resolution. In Miri, this story showcases American positivism to solve any problem. For in American science fiction stories, there is usually a happy ending because Americans love a happy ending. So here, a conclusion analysis of all three stories. So Miri of Star Trek suggests that without adults to guide them, children will revert to savagery. This is a pessimistic view of human nature, and it suggests that we are all capable of cruelty if we are not properly socialized. Luckily, the Enterprise crew came to rescue them. That's just like Lord of the Flies. Lord of the Flies suggests that without strong institutions to guide us, kids will revert to savagery, just like with Miri. This is also a pessimistic view of human nature, and it suggests that we are all dependent on our societies to keep us from becoming violent and cruel. Luckily, a British airplane, a naval officer, rescued the boys. Supernova Era suggests that even in the face of great adversity, people can still find hope and create a better future. This is a more optimistic view of human nature, and it suggests that we are capable of overcoming our baser instincts and creating a more just and equitable society. In this story, nobody rescued the children, as they had to rescue themselves and rebuild the world themselves. And so Supernova Era, unlike the other two stories, offers a more positive outlook on human nature. It says that even though we do have this dark side, we're able to overcome our dark side through morality and education. And that is so Chinese. You have no idea that the basis of Chinese society is all about education in order to overcome immorality. And that's why in Asian culture, education is so important. It's key to everything. So all three stories offer valuable insights into the nature of human society and the potential for violence and chaos. They also offer hope that even in the darkest of times, people can still find the strength to create a better future. In addition to the themes of violence and chaos, these stories also explore the theme of hope, cooperation, and the importance of community. They remind us that even in the most difficult of circumstances, it is possible to find strength in each other and create a better future. These stories are still relevant today as we face a world that is increasingly divided and violent. They offer us a warning about the dangers of chaos and violence, but they also offer us hope that we can overcome these challenges and create a better future. And so in Lord of the Flies, I remember in my English class, after we finished the unit, and then the English teacher said, at the end of the story of Lord of the Flies, after the boys descended into savagery, luckily they were rescued by adults, by a naval officer. Then my teacher said, but who will rescue the adults if the adults go into or descend into the savagery of nuclear explosions? That was the end point of Lord of the Flies. And then in Supernova Era answers that question, is that nobody's going to rescue the kids. The kids have to rescue themselves and learn to overcome the dark side of their nature, which is exactly what they did in Supernova Era, where after the nuclear explosion on Antarctica, the kids realized the error of their ways, and then they quickly grew up and didn't make that mistake again. And then the rest of the novel talks about how that first generation had to learn the hard way and grow up really fast, so that the subsequent generations look back on that time period, historical time period. That's why they call it the Supernova Era. Because in Chinese storytelling, it's always about telling a story, a historical story about the past and how they overcame the past in order to have their current beautiful present. And so everything is back then, once upon a time, that sort of thing. And so that's very Chinese storytelling. And so it's very Chinese to use education to overcome, your dark side. And what's interesting about all three stories is they all talk about what would happen if children were left alone and the adults left. How would the children overcome their beastly side? Would everybody just descend into chaos and into chaos? And then also in both British, America, and China, all had their different answers, different ways in which the children would come about and be restored to order. And for me, it's very interesting to find the different cultural differences in answering the same basic question of how would the children left alone be able to create civilization by themselves. And so that question was answered in three different ways by three different cultures. And so when you read science fiction stories from many different cultures, you get to see how the science fiction story can be told from multiple perspectives. And that, for me, is the most interesting thing about this research journey, where I ask the research question, do other countries have science fiction, or is there science fiction outside of Gene Roddenberry, Star Trek, Star Wars, and Isaac Asimov? And so far so good. I'm learning about all of the different kinds of science fiction stories from around the world and having a great time putting together similarly themed stories together, and then comparing and contrasting how the different cultures would write about the same science fiction trope. And so in future videos, I will delve deeper into other stories, other themes, and I'm working on more stories for you in the future. So stay tuned to my channel, Professor H Writing Channel.